Hey guys, Ryan Dunford here with TLR. Today we're going to do the 8X Elite build. We're going to do bag B and C, which are the shocks and the turnbuckles. And I also brought a special guest in today. His name's Anthony Westergaard. Say hi.
What's going on, guys?
Anthony is one of our racers here in Southern California. He's also the owner of Palm Desert RC these days for when it gets to be a track again, when we're out of this crisis. And he's just fast guy, all around good guy. Anthony, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background? And
I'm mostly a 8-scale guy, but I'm gonna, once all this stuff goes away, hopefully start doing a little more 10-scale stuff. That's pretty much it, though. We're out in Southern California. Normally it gets a run a pretty good fair amount, so hopefully once all this stuff goes away, we'll get back to racing.
And you do a little bit of motocross, supercross type stuff too, and with you and the family and everybody?
Oh, yeah. My son's super into dirt bikes. I've kind of slowed it down now, but started doing RC car stuff to take over, so.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Well, guys, so as people are getting on here, today I am going to try, obviously we've got Anthony on here. I want things to not slow down at all. So today it'll just be these two cameras. So I will be moving my screen back and forth to show you my build area. So as you can see, today we're going to build shocks. This is essentially what happens when you open bag B of an 8X Elite. 1, 2, 3, 4 bags, spring bags, and all of your shock metal parts. Now, let me go ahead and do this for a second, just because it'll be better. So as you guys can see, we do package them like this. You've got your cap, your body, your collar, and then your lower cap. We package them like this for a couple reasons. One, it makes it so the parts don't hit against each other and get dinged. And they look pretty when you get them. And the other reason is it always makes sure that everything screws in place properly. So we make them package it that way at the vendor, but like, you know, your O-ring isn't in this so that everything can just twist off. But, you know, one of the first things you do is just go ahead and pull all these things apart. When we're building, or when I'm building the shock bag, in all fairness, the way the parts are packaged, it's so that everything stays. Shocks are really important. It's important that things don't get marred or dinged. So the bags don't really seem like they make a lot of sense, but just so you guys kind of understand a little bit about my side of the world is, here's all your little metal parts so they don't hit anything else. Here's pretty much all your rubber, plasticky, you know, small plastic shock parts. These are so that these aren't together so that the screws don't mar up any of this. And then you've got your shafts and your pistons, you know, pretty tightly packaged. And then most of your bigger plastic parts and your springs. Now those are all together, mainly so that they don't mar each other. They're not that way, packaged that way for any way else. It's not like you open bag B1 and you build bag B1 and then you open bag B2, kind of like you would with, like we did yesterday with the diffs, with shocks. You pretty much just open it all and then start building. So I'm going to go ahead and start opening everything and getting it all laid out because I like to make sure I have all the parts first and foremost. The vendor we have packages these really well, so it's pretty rare when we have any parts that are a problem or missing, but I do always like to do it just so I kind of know and I can more or less start my assembly line here. Anthony, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about what you've been up since all of this fun process has started, what you're, you know, maybe what you're looking forward to once we get back into the swing of things and your plans for the rest of the year.
Well, hopefully we're able to do AMS and nationals, but with the way that things are going, it doesn't look like that is going to happen. I'm not really sure. We're looking forward to going to Pennsylvania for nationals, but I'm not sure if with all the stuff the governors and the president has put in place that will be a thing. So I've been running at just a local backyard track, trying to get a little bit of wheel time in, but that's about it. Haven't really I ordered one of the VRC things. I don't know, Ryan, if you've messed around with those much or ever tried one.
Let's see here. Hold on. Let me bring you a little bit bigger there. Oh, even bigger. There we go. What do you get? Oh, VRC. Yeah. I haven't tried it. I want to try it, but
I ordered one from the guys at VSR. They have like a one that's supposed to be a little bit better, I guess, like a modified one. I ordered one of those just to try it out, I guess. Something different.
Yeah, I mean, why not? You never know. At least you get to keep your radio in your hand, right? Keep the feel in your hand and everything. One thing I want
to track in the backyard that we've been kind of bashing on every once in a while, but trying to keep the whole social distance thing.
Right. It's hard to do that, and try to, you want to go out and you want to have fun, but you also want to respect things and make sure, so it's kind of it's a balancing act, right? It's, only so many people, maybe people you've been around lately, all that kind of stuff.
Which I still work for the government, and they don't really, nothing's changed for us at work. So, I mean, we have to wear a mask and stuff, but other than that, we're still doing the same stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, like personally for us, like I'm working at home. All of us in the office are working at home. But like we still have most of our warehouse folk, well, not most, but a lot of our warehouse folks there, but they've definitely changed a lot of what we're allowed to do. Like I'm literally not allowed to go into the warehouse. There's a big sign that says stop, do not go. Things like that, just to try to keep us a little bit separated, keep everybody safe.
Yeah, they've been putting a bunch of pieces of tape on the ground all over the place at our work, at least, where like stop points pretty much to make it so people all stay 6 feet apart.
Right. Yeah. It kind of feels like the supermarkets everywhere, right?
Yep. Same thing.
So let me show everybody kind of what we got here. So the Elite kit comes. Basically, the shock bodies have been updated. They're a little smoother. The shock caps are a little stronger. The shock shafts are now the 3.5 mil shock shafts. These are the updated version, much stronger than what we originally had. If I can get it in the screen. Here you can see, this is how you tell that it's the updated shock shaft. You look at the end threads. And the end threads on it, there's two ways to tell. One, the thread starts deep and goes shallower and shallower, or it's what's called a tapered thread, or it's a silvery goldish color instead of black. The original ends was flat and then it went out, and they had a tendency they could pop right there. And these are different material, different temperament, all kinds of fun stuff there. And then the kit comes with 2 of each of 8x1/2 pistons, and I don't know which way to go. 2 flats, 2 tapers. We run the taper down. It's really hard to see that, but this is the tapered one. This is the flat one. The kit, that when you open the package and the way it tells you to build them, is what's called emulsion, and that's what these are. These are the emulsion seal. You do get the updated bladders also. Those are in the option bag. So if you're looking at another setup sheet, like Anthony, I think you typically prefer to run a bladder, right?
Yeah, I run bladders and I run the tapers front and rear.
Front end, right. So we do sell a lot of different pistons, guys. 5-hole, 8-hole. We sell flats, tapers. We will be selling 6-hole even at some point here. just to make sure that everybody kind of has more or less what they want, because we feel that our piston and our shock is all meant to work together. The bores are very specific. The way it fits on the piston, on the shock shaft's very specific. The other thing I want to make note of that's a little different in the 8X Elite kit versus the 8X kit is, I'll just keep it up here. So the guides, there's actually 3 guides, and it's next to impossible for me to show all these, with the 3.5 shock shaft kit, because what we wanted to do was give you one shock body, but let you use either 3.5 or 4 mil shock shafts. So for the 3.5 mil shock shafts, one, you need a lower guide, which is this really thin, it just looks like a little plastic washer, right? And it essentially makes the shock body, which is normally the lower guide for the 4 mil shock shaft, into a 3.5 mil. And it takes up the space because the height of the O-ring versus the diameter, ID, OD, all has to change with the different size shock shaft to make the buildup properly and make it smooth. So anyway, that's kind of a rundown of what we have with the 8X Elite kit as far as the shocks and what changed. The bladders that are in the kit are the new, what we call reinforced bladder. So the bladder is updated. So mainly you got shock bodies, shock cap, upper cap, shock shafts, the guides and the bushings, or the guides and the O-rings to make it work with the 3.5 mil. And then the reinforced bladder would be all of the updated parts, as well as 8 by 1.2 flat and tapered pistons. So I am going to go ahead and get started building here, guys, and I'll talk a little bit, but as you have questions, feel free to ask them. Anthony can answer questions, or if I see him, I'll answer them, but I'm going to start building away here. And again, we're building shocks, Bag B, 8X Elite. And I guess I kind of do it a little bit like an assembly line. So, I mean, I start with a shock body. There's a little O-ring and a giant O-ring, okay? Giant O-ring is for shock collars. It goes in the shock collars to keep them in place as you're twisting. This one keeps the lower cap on so it doesn't just fall off as you're running. So the first thing I do is put that O-ring on. We don't need to stare at my ugly mug, okay? And then for this, you get a thin spacer, right? Make sure it's in there and flat. You get an X-ring. You get a thicker guide for the center. You get an X-ring, okay? Make sure it's all pushed in there nice and flat. You can see there's a little bit of a ledge there. And then there's this lower bushing. Now this lower bushing is going to be near impossible to show, but it's got 2 different sides. One is taller and bigger OD, and one is thinner. The reason for that is one side fits nice into there, but from this side, and one side fits into here. So if you put it in and it doesn't move around, you got it in the right way. If you put it in and it can move around a whole bunch, that's the wrong way, guys. So take that, flip it over, you can see it's nice and flat. And then I'll just take and throw that on. And then I'm going to do the next 3 shocks. So I'll go through those a little quicker. And maybe if you guys have questions, feel free to ask away, okay?
So, Ryan, do you ever put grease on those? On the actual pieces that you're putting in now?
I did when we used O-rings, but now that we use X-rings, I don't. I just use the oil, and you'll see me put that on later onto the bottom. But when I do, I use this stuff. It's just our shock O-ring grease from TLR. That's what I used to use, TLR 77002. now it seems like the material, we've changed the material that we used a while back on the 4 mil X-rings, and then the 3.5s were always built that way. But these have natural lubrication to them now. But some do prefer to use it. I mean, Anthony, you tell us all about what you do when you're building up the lower cartridge, as we call it.
I normally just use a little bit of grease and put it on there when I'm putting it together, and then I slide the shock in from the top through and make sure that the grease doesn't go up into the shock body. And then I also grease both of the O-rings when you put this one onto the shock shaft or onto the shock body.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it so the shocks are a little bit easier to adjust, and they don't seem to bind or anything like as if you were to do it with just a dry O-ring.
Yeah, that one, that's, yes, for sure, right? I use shock oil just because that's what I've always done since I was younger. But that, like the green slime or even black grease for that O-ring. And we'll get to that stage, and then we can kind of reiterate that again for everybody. But just talking about some of the differences here. But guys, don't be afraid of shocks. It seems like there's a lot of parts initially that go into a shock. Trust me, our shocks are nothing compared to like a full-size car or anything like that. You'd be surprised if you took all those apart, how many parts are in it. So as you can see, now I've got all of my shocks built up. This is just a terrible view. I got to figure out another camera here. Anyway, so you can see I've got all of the shock cartridges built up on the bottom. Okay. For me, the next thing I usually do is I take care of getting my pistons onto my shock shafts. As you can see in here, I've got all of my rear stuff and all of my top stuff, or my front stuff. So rear, front shocks, the bodies, shafts, all of that. How is it that we hear typing? Let's see here. Okay, let's just go through some comments really quick. Hey,
So there's a couple of comments on here about no grease on the X-rings.
Yep.
And like Ryan just said now, that's something that I personally do when I put them together is I put a whole bunch of grease on them, and I pretty much like pack grease around all the O-rings when I put them in the bottom of the shock where the shock shaft goes through. And then I punch the grease back out so that way it doesn't go into the shock body.
Okay.
On the 22 series, it was recommended to soak the O-rings. It's not necessarily with the X-rings, but for this part, I recommend soaking the O-ring in oil just because it makes it a lot more fluid to change your shock position or your ride height or whatever you want to do with your shock.
Right. Let me add to that comment. I wonder what that noise is. Anyway, hopefully nobody else can hear that. But so the original 22 5.0 3mm O-rings, they recommended soaking them in oil. And what that meant was actually putting them into oil and letting them and absorb the oil so that it's sealed properly. For the 22 users out there, they released a V2 of the shock bushing or guide set, as well as a V2 of the X-ring for the 3mm shock shafts for the 22X4. So now if you still run the 5.0 shocks on your 5.0 or the G3 shocks on your 5.0, you don't have to do any of that soaking of O-rings anymore. You still want to grease them with something, which is what, to Anthony's point, you still want to grease them, but you don't have to like soak them overnight or anything like that. Okay, just so you guys know. So I think that might have been what somebody was referring to, but so for the shock shaft, okay, for the shock shaft, it builds like it's kind of always built. Okay, I always get shock pliers. I just use our dynamite shock plier. What is that typing noise? Okay.
Ryan, it's like your speaker is going out on your phone or something.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, but every time you talk, it's like full chipmunk.
Okay. How about now? Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, every time you talk, it gets all staticky.
Lovely, because I'm just using my computer here, trying to move anything away that might be a problem. Hold on. I know. Yeah, Anthony, I agree. Okay, Bob says we can hear you clear, Ryan. So there's some reverb. Do you only have just your phone, Anthony, or do you have your phone and another device?
No, it's just my phone.
Okay. All right, well, we'll try to just soldier through this, see how this goes. Sorry, guys. So, shock, get a large washer. Okay, this is a rear shock shaft, right? In the 8X Elite, we recommend putting the taper piston in the rear. Now that we're learning the balance of the car, we are actually learning that we like a taper front and rear, to Anthony's point earlier. But the taper goes down, or basically you want to be able to read the size of the holes, the 1.2, right? And then we take little screw with the little washer, little silver washer. I use an 050 in this, right? MIP 050. I do not use thread lock on this screw, and I screw it backwards first until I hear it click like that, and then I screw forward so I can make sure I'm not cross-threading anything. So I basically thread it right there. You can feel it almost the screw bottom out because you're compressing this build, okay? I've never had a shock piston come loose. I will say I probably get into my shocks once every day I'm at the track, maybe every other day at the track. If you are going to use thread lock on this little screw, use a very small amount of it, and I would actually recommend putting it on the screws and letting it dry most of the way first, and then putting it on. But that's shock shaft with a piston on it, and I'll build the other ones. What do you do, Anthony, when you're building yours up? Do you use anything on yours?
What I use probably shouldn't be said because it's probably not right, but I actually use red Loctite, and then I heat it up with a soldering iron, and then I take it out.
Okay, and that's fine as long as
I don't want them falling off.
Right, I understand, and I agree. There's nothing wrong with using what you've always used or what you use, right? If it works for you, if you know how to use it. So if we were to tell people, yeah, hey, use red thread lock or Loctite, and then they go out there and they just put it in and they just try to take this screw. This screw with red Loctite with this little itty bitty head, it will snap. It'll strip or snap.
Yep.
Except for the part.
I put the red Loctite on the screw and I let it dry on the screw, and then I'll put it in. And then as soon as I go to take it out, if it doesn't want to budge, then I'll heat it up. And then it'll normally come right out. Or I'll just put a slit in the top of the screw and then take it out with a flathead.
Well, and that's the thing. The big thing, the heat. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand about thread lock. I mean, it's a liquid to begin with. If you heat it up, you can turn it into a liquid again. Now, you don't want to melt everything, but you can definitely get it out if you need to. You just don't try to strip the head first and then try to get it out. It's never going to happen. Now, one thing I always do is I do always put my pistons, and you're not going to be able to see that. I do always put my pistons in with the number facing up. That way, if I pull the top of the shock cap off, because I might forget what the piston is, I can easily tell. The other thing you can do is if you lightly run a Sharpie across them with black, all of a sudden you can make out the 1.2 or whatever it is super easy. So you don't want to get it down into the crevice, right? You just want to lightly rub it across the top. And then bam, you can tell what all the pistons are really, really easy. And Anthony's a little younger than me, so he could probably see stuff a lot better. But for me, I can read that, right? I couldn't really read it before. So now I've got all that done. So the next step I will do is I will usually get the, I'm going to go ahead and get the shock shaft into the shock body, okay? Now for this, I put shock oil on the bottom of this. Now your kit comes with shock oil. So for a second, I want to talk a little bit about shock oil. Right, kit comes with it. We also sell shock oil. 32.5. 32.5. I always recommend to everybody that if you're a racer, hold on one second. Let me try, Anthony, I'm going to try to mute you and see if that background noise stops, because I tried muting me and it didn't work. So hold on one second. All right. So it's something. Does anybody hear the clicking anymore? I'll unmute him in a second. So give me 1 second. So let me explain this. So I typically recommend not using this and using this, okay? The reason I recommend that is there's not anything wrong with the oil that comes in your kit. It's shock oil. It's silicone shock oil. It's good, okay? However, it's not made, we package this in-house in the United States, okay? This is packaged by us. You would be surprised the tolerance that we allow on this shock oil. This is shock oil that's packaged. This is 32.5. I know that this is 32.5. It might be 32, it might be 33, but it's 32.5, okay? This, I'm not sure, but I do know that if I put this in and I go from 32.5 to 35 of this, then I changed 2.5 weight oil. I don't know if I did this and went from 32.5 to 35, it might feel really similar to me. So this, I recommend using this because it just makes it so that when I go to make a change, to change my setup, I know that that change is doing what I expect it to do. So again, I'm not saying don't use this. I'm not saying don't use this. I'm not saying use this or use this. I'm saying I recommend using this because when you go to replace it, this is what you'll buy, not this. So anyway, I don't like that Anthony's muted. I think he left. Can't unmute your guest because they chose to mute themselves. Oh, okay. Well, let me try to unmute him now. Let's see if it comes back or not. Unmute Mike. Oh, maybe he muted him still. Anthony. Oh, there you are. Okay. All right. So anyway, that's my spiel about shock oil, guys. Do what you want, but I take this stuff. I happen to throw it away. We include it as a convenience. Some companies don't even include shock oil. So I'm going to use this. As you can see, I pulled the little blue cap out. I'm going to pull it out of my 40 weight as well, because I build these with 40 in the front and 32 in the rear. Now, I take a little bit of oil, put a tiny bit of oil right down this, and I kind of let it run all over the place. And then as I'm sliding this in, I rotate it, okay? And then make sure, see, beautiful, nice and smooth, right? One thing I do sometimes, let me get that cat hair off. Yeah, I have cats. Let's see, maybe this one won't be. Yeah, that one's smooth too. So sometimes what I'll do, and I found this with the 22X4 because of the way the stack up is, I'll put the shock shaft in and kind of move it about here. And I'll actually go back and I will loosen this a tiny bit, kind of move everything around. What that does is it makes sure all your O-rings and guides and everything is centered really well. And then I just tighten that again, and then it's glass, right? So just my 2 cents. And as far as what oil I used for this part, it doesn't really matter. I don't really wipe it off yet, and that's because I put the shock boot on next. And you'll see that in a second here. All right, can I hear you now, Anthony?
I think I fixed it. My speaker on my phone apparently didn't like that.
All right, sweet. So everybody should be happier now. Thank you for figuring that out. I appreciate it.
I was like moving this stuff around. I'm moving my motor away from it. I'm like, what's going on?
See if it was reverse. That's what I was doing. My coat moved away. All my tools moved away from my computer. So the next thing I do is I put the shock boot on. Now, guys, the shock boot is made of rubber. If I take this and I just put it on there, between here and here, it actually gets a pretty darn good seal. And that can actually affect how your shock works. I've seen a lot of people do a lot of things. What you want to do is you want to vent this. And I've seen people take nice sharp scissors and kind of cut and put almost like a square hole in it. Like we used to make those as kids, the origami snowflakes and stuff. What I prefer to do, most of us that race have leather punch, hole punch, whatever you want to call it. It's actually on the back of these dynamite pliers too. But I'll take this, and the reason I like this version better is the hole is nice and round, so it has a tendency to not rip as easy. I don't know if you can see that now. So now if I pull on it and everything and it goes through all of its shock stuff, it doesn't tear or rip or anything like that. But also something to keep in mind, there are two different length ones, okay? Oops, against black doesn't work so well, right? So the short one goes in the front, long one goes in the rear. And guys, yep, I know a lot of this for some of you is total common sense. Some people, they just get to building or take parts out of stuff and they don't realize it. And so that's why we mention it. So I'm just going to punch holes in all these real quick. Go on, Anthony.
I just thought of another thing also is putting that, my camera at, if you can see that little line in there, that way you know how many turns you're going down when you're adjusting shocks.
Yep. Yeah, and I'll talk to them about that a little bit towards the end, because putting the line in there, well, we can talk about it right now. So I built some shocks earlier. We'll just say there are other 8X-ish shocks that I built earlier. And you can see I just put a little silver Sharpie line on there. That's not my preferred method, but this truck isn't mine or car or whatever it is. And so normally I do kind of what Anthony, I think when you showed yours, let me make your video bigger. Did you use a cutoff wheel?
Yeah, I just use a Dremel and I put it just
Yeah.
a little line in there with the Dremel, so that way, whenever you turn one turn, that way you can do one turn on all 4 shocks
Perfect.
and it's equal.
Yeah, and same thing with me. Now there's 2 different trains of thoughts for these. Some put it on to basically where they think it's going to end up being about, and then they put it on the both lefts, the left and right of the front or the left and right of the rear, and then they'll measure between here and here with calipers, get them exactly even, and then make the mark. And then there's the other train of thought where they take this and they run it all the way to the top. They center it off of something and make a mark. I run it all the way to the top and make the mark, and then run this back down wherever I want it. The only reason I do that is so that if I do get near the top for some reason, I can make sure they bottom out at the same place. Threads, these aren't like, it's not like the threads always start right here on the 6th place. You know, the threads sometimes start in a different place. So I always go all the way up, put my line after the shock's built, and I'll show that a little later on. But there's a lot of methods that work for that. But yeah, you want to mark that, guys. And the reason for that is as the cars get into a better envelope, smaller changes make bigger differences. And I've taken people's car and they've been driving around the track and they'll come into pit and I'm like, hey, do you mind if I make an adjustment, or I'm going to change your shock collar a little bit? I'll move a collar and go out. And they're like, oh my gosh, it does this better, it does this better, or it does this worse, or it does this worse. And they're always like, oh my gosh, what'd you do? Turn that thing a full turn or a couple turns? It's like, no, that was a quarter turn. The cars are getting more sensitive because we're getting into a finer and finer area or envelope of high performance. So don't be afraid to turn these a quarter at a time. It'll make a difference if everything's nice and smooth. But I'll set that random shock from nowhere to the side. So I'm going to go ahead and throw some shock boots on here. And again, the reason I left the oil towards the bottom there is now the bottom of this has a little bit of lubrication, so it slides around a little bit easier. But I'll put all of those in place. I don't pull them up yet. I don't pull them up onto here yet because I still need to build the shock, so they don't need to be up there yet. But yeah, are there any, do we have any questions? Are you able to scroll?
Jonathan Ment asked me what shock caps I had on my pre-built shocks. They're just a fast race cap. It's something that I started messing around with a little bit. I don't really feel that they're much different than I don't remember the actual name of them, the reinforced bladders. Our reinforced bladder and this shock, I feel, are very close.
And that's kind of one of the reasons the reinforced bladder came about, was testing with those fast race caps. When I did my testing with the fast race caps, the biggest thing I noticed is the amount of forward traction the car had with them without changing anything else on the car.
Yeah. But they are a pain to build.
I have a set in my box. I spent the $80 or whatever it cost to build them, to get them. I've been doing this for a little while nowadays, and building them was not for me. But if you build them right and they work for you, then so be it, guys. We're not against running that, but you can run our cap with the screw in place with the new reinforced bladder, and it's going to give you a fairly similar effect. Jumps a little bit better, and it's got more forward grip, in my opinion. That's the 2 things that the fast rate cap does, and the 2 things that our reinforced bladder does. So
I went back and forth with our stock bladder and the reinforced bladder, and I do feel it has more forward grip, and I think it goes through the bumps a little bit better. With the fast race cap, I didn't really. If I went back and forth with our reinforced bladder and the fast race cap, and I couldn't feel a difference.
Okay. Yeah, and I was pretty similar. I mean, they're, as long as you build both of them pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and put the shock bottom on now. I don't really have any tricks to this. My biggest one is getting it started sucks.
So with that, all I do is the same thing I do with turnbuckle. I just barely take any material out of that with a reamer, and that's, you just got to make sure you don't use like a Kyosho reamer or a super fine, like super abrasive reamer, because you'll put a big hole in it.
Yeah, you want the most amount of hold on a shock end as possible, I guess. And that's why on a shock end, I struggle to use a reamer. I will say, since we've tapered the thread, it's a lot easier to get the shock end on. With our original shock shafts, it was feet to get them on without reaming them. But I get them on so that they get nice and straight. And then I will take them most of the way like this, and then I will finish with my hand, because I don't want to strip this out. You strip this out, you're going to have a failure while you run. And these get threaded on until they stop, okay? You're going to feel all of a sudden it just doesn't want to go anymore, right? Now I've got a shock nice and smooth. I mean, it actually moves. It almost has suspension because of the shock boot, right? We've really done a lot of work on our shocks, guys. We did a lot of work from the 4.0 to the 8X, and then we didn't rest on them then. We did even more work on them after that. And our shocks are pretty good shocks now. You know, I won't ever say anything's the best. I don't really care what I've run before, what I will run. Nothing is the best. Everything's got its advantages. But I know our shock is better than it used to be, especially with this Elite. That's one way you know that you get these. Okay, and so when I'm up all the way, you'll see there's the end. It's a tapered. There isn't a millimeter, 2 millimeters, nothing shown there. Now I can get my fingernail in between the edge of the taper and that, right? But I've seen some people put these new tapered ones on and they don't get them on all the way. And it's simply because they worry about stripping this out. And I can understand that, but you got to keep in mind, since it's a tapered thread, it's going to feel a little bit harder because you're kind of pushing the plastic out a little bit further. I get to see all kinds of stuff as things fall. Let's see, any other? Maybe he's rebooting. Can you? Vinny, that's a good question. Building up a bladder shock. What I will do is I will build one of these shocks emulsion, and I will grab one of the reinforced bladders out of there. Kind of sucks. I built some bladder shocks earlier today. Actually, I'll pull apart one of those other shocks and I'll just put oil in it. Yeah, Vinny, we'll try to build both ways. It's not really what this is for, but we can make it for anything we all need. But you can see here, everything's nice and smooth, guys. I mean, these things should be pretty close to butter. So the next thing I'm going to do, now these are emulsion. So I'm going to put the emulsion seal. There's a lip on it that goes out like this, not in. I've seen some people put them in this way because they think, oh, it seals it better. No, they're meant to go this way so that it's out, so that it seals against the shock itself, the shock body better. But for the most part, you can get these in by hand, but when I just push it in, it gets kind of funky. So I go in, like a little bit there, and I just kind of make sure it's down all the way around. Okay, there we go. So now you can see inside there, looks nice and round. That's how I know when it's down against it all the way. Since we're going to build it, go on.
Bob Taylor had a good little trick tip that he just put on there, that he actually chucks up an old shock shaft in his drill, and then you just put the drill on slow, obviously, and then let it go in and out, that's what I do for like all my turnbuckles and stuff. I'll use an old turnbuckle, and I'll do half my turnbuckles with it on the drill, and I'll put black grease on there and make it go in and out, so that way the turnbuckles are easier to
Yep, that's a good tip.
Bind up.
Now this is the shock cap screw, guys. It needs this little gold washer. So it's actually brass. It helps to seal it. So I will always put that on a screw on my wrench, ready to go for when I'm going to put oil in. So I'm ready to put oil in the rear shock. Okay. The rear shock in this case is going to get 32 weight oil. And the first thing I do before I put any oil in my shocks, again, this is 1, because I'm old, 2, because I run a lot of different cars, and 3, because I build a lot of different shocks and stuff. I'm always testing a lot of stuff. So I write the oil weight right on the shock body. The fronts are going to get 40. And that comes off no problem with either motor spray or a little bit of pressure on a greasy towel, because the grease will pull that right off of there too. But that just means when I go to run my car, if it's, I don't know, maybe since Nitro Challenge, if maybe we get locked inside buildings and we can't race. I don't remember what I was running way back then. It is what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and put this down a little bit. And here's how I build an Emulsion shock. So again, this is a rear shock. I got my shock cap that already has that in there. There is no screw in it at this time. Okay. Now, there's a lot of trains of thought of this. I've seen some people pull this back all the way. I've seen some people go so far as to take it off. I've never really found from a performance perspective that changed things for me. So I'm just going to build it the way I build it, and that is how it is. And there's a lot of different, so I will put oil in. And I got to build my 22X4 finally, Anthony. I forgot how small 10 scale shocks are. I felt like I was putting drops of oil in. It was so cute. Sorry. So I put enough. Take half a bottle. Right. There's about half filled with oil, okay? And then this shock, okay, guys, whether you like it or not, this is an Emulsion shock. An Emulsion shock is oil mixed with air to fill the volume. That's what emulsion is, okay? I'm not putting this in a vacuum pump. I'm not putting this in anything. I'm not going to let this sit for an hour to the side. And it is also different if I'm building a set of shocks for a Dakota or an Anthony before a main event or a semi, something I know they're going to run a long time. If I'm practicing and changing setups a lot, I'm tending to build stuff as fast as I can just to get it onto somebody's car to get it out there to see if they can do it. So, but this is how I build a fresh set of shocks. Now, a fresh set of shocks, there's nothing in there, right? There's no oil in there, which means, and they seal against the piston seals against the edge pretty well. So there's nothing underneath the piston right now, okay? So whether you like it or not, I am bringing the piston all the way up past the top of the oil, okay? Now all my oil is down here. So I made sure the whole bottom of everything's filled in. Now, don't pull it down really hard, okay? I'm gonna let go and I'm gonna pull down nice and slow. 1, so I do create the least amount of air bubbles. But 2, if I pull it down hard, it shoots up oil at my face. Ask me how I know. You learn these things when you're younger and you don't have a lot of people around to teach you this stuff. So, but now I'm going to take it while it's in the oil and I'm going to massage it a little bit. I'm just going to make sure everything's filled in nice and well. Okay. Because I do want the least amount of air in my emulsion shock to keep it the most consistent over a run, but it needs to have the proper amount of air in it or it's going to hydrolock over your run. So there's that. Now, this is a rear shock. So a rear shock volume-wise, there's not a lot going on. If I fill this to the top, I put the cap on and I go to bleed it, oil is going to come out. A front shock is short enough that if you don't fill it and like dome it or fill it and maybe put some oil into the cap, you're not going to get oil that's going to come out. You need oil to come out when you're bleeding an emulsion shock. So I'm going to bleed this right now so you guys can see. The other thing I want to let you know is right now, it doesn't matter which cap I put on. Okay, the caps don't have the little plastic shock guides in it. They're not marked specific or anything. When you're rebuilding shocks, your cap, your shock, your cup, everything should stay in one line, and you should be rebuilding essentially this shock so it all gets back together so that the little line that you made is always in the right place, so that your shock bushings are in there the right way, everything. So right now, it doesn't matter. I can pick up any cap because it's not mated to this shock yet. The second I put this cap on this shock, it's mated. It should stay that way for life, okay? Again, that's because the threads are started in a different spot on this cap versus this cap. They're started on a different spot on this body versus this body. Keep them together, guys. So it's not full yet. Again, this is a rear 32. I'm going to fill this until it's full. Okay, I can't tilt it over so you can see, but you can, I'm not pouring it on my keyboard, so you can see it's flat filled. Okay, so then I'm going to take a cap, I'm going to put it on here, and I'm going to do what Anthony Westergaard never does. Love you.
Build them emulsion?
No, well, that too. I'm going to get my shock tool. Okay. Now, I don't like the shock top tool. I think it sucks, personally. But the bottom one works fine. I grab it, and you tighten the shock. You tighten it so that the shock cap is always in the same place on the body. Again, so same thing with that, puts the lines always in the same spot. Okay, when I rebuild my shocks, this is always centered with my line by the time I rebuild it. Okay, now this is tight. I can put this all the way up there. Now, this is going to be kind of hard to show. Go ahead.
You also had a question about measuring the shock to make sure that they're both rears are the same length, both fronts are the same.
Okay, that's not a bad idea, guys. The main reason is because a lot of people they don't have as much experience versed in making, oh, that stopped. That's the exact stopping point. So I'm going to make sure everything's the same. I would say it's more important to measure what's called your stroke on a 10th scale shock, because your stroke determines your droop on a 10th scale vehicle. In an 8th scale vehicle, you're usually not fully extending the shock. However, your stroke can affect the way a shock fills because your stroke affects where the piston is in the volume. So if this shock goes all the way up, this piston actually only comes up to about here, okay? But if I loosen my shock bottom a little bit, it now brings the stroke of the piston, instead of being from here to here to here to here. So some people like that piston staying kind of in the center of the oil more, is what that's called. It's something you guys can play around with, but it's a good thing to do. I didn't do it for this build because it's brand new shocks and they're going onto a brand new car. For a brand new car, I won't do that. If I'm playing around with the stroke to see where I like the piston riding in the oil, assuming I've got room to play with that, that's when I'll mess around with that. But now we're going to go ahead and bleed the shock. Okay, again, I've already got the bleeder screw with the washer on it, right, on my MIP 1.5. These are Exotech little guides, if anybody cares, just because they happen to see them on here. But it's an MIP 1.5. Those are little Exotech guides, okay? And I'm going to pull this up like this, and I'm going to hold a napkin down here. And I'm slowly, now you'll see how there's the hole that I have. That's where the shock screw goes, or the emulsion cap screw goes. Okay. This is going to be so hard to show on here. Can you see that at all, Anthony? Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
All right. So, oh, there you go. You can see oil's starting to come out, and I'm still going slow. And then I push and I hold. Okay. I don't let go. I push and I hold. Now, I go like this and I put it against the bottom, right? Wrong way. Okay. And I push down, right? Let that stop. And I put the screw in place. Okay, guys. Now, this screw, all this screw is doing is holding the oil in that cap. If you built this right, an emulsion shock should never be built with any rebound. It's not the purpose of an emulsion shock because it doesn't have a bladder in there. Rebound, when I'll build a bladder shock up next, and then I'll just finish off these another day. Sorry, trying to get this clean because this is Jim's car, so I don't want to. And see, guys, if you think that Sharpie's not going to come off, even just rubbing the shock body with my hands a little bit, it can come off pretty easily. So I'm going to rewrite it, 32 again. So now you can see, I work this in and out. You can hear the oil, the air in it, guys, right? Now, it's only coming out the amount that this is pushing it out. It's not, I don't need to rebleed this. I have sat here and I have worked a shock. I've done the double bleeding, the triple bleeding. All of that is really, really important when you're playing with bladders. I know some people that double bleed because they feel that an emulsion shock pressurizes more over time. That's impossible. Unless you run enough that you heat up the oil inside here, it can't pressurize anymore if you bled it properly, meaning there's the proper amount of air to oil volume in this. Okay.
And if you do start to have rebound, it can be one of your seals are bad, and it's allowing air to come in through the bottom.
Yeah, and what Anthony's talking about would be the shock technically sucking air in through here, right? And that's a great point, Anthony. If it's building up more pressure over time, it's because it usually sucked air. Now, one thing that helps with that, if you're consistently in a situation where you have a shock, maybe you're not running a TLR car and you're running a car that you do have a car that's sucking in air. Two things can help that. Soaking your O-ring or X-ring in oil overnight, it swells the O-ring. Or putting some green slime or shock O-ring grease on it. Both of those things can help with sucking air, for what it's worth. But why don't you go ahead and see if there's any questions here. I'm going to fill the rest of these shocks really quick, and just so guys can see, I mean, putting shocks together. Now, I do have this over here, guys. It's our TLR stand. This is a shock stand, okay? I use this when I'm working on my shocks all the time. I'll usually line up all my shocks in a row and put this right next to it so that these four things are with these four things. The only time I use this is when I'm building shocks, I look inside, or I manage to get a bunch of air bubbles in, or I'm building shocks that are a bladder shock, because a bladder shock, you want to get all the air out of it. And then you want all the air bubbles gone. So you want to let it either sit around or use one of those pump machines to get all the air bubbles out. So I'm going to put put oil in the rest of these, and then we'll do the next step. But if there's any questions or anything you can think of, Anthony, fire away.
Vinny asked how often the seal should be replaced. Normally, I'll replace the seals on my shocks. You can kind of tell when the plastic starts to get worn out. And once the plastic's worn out, I'll make sure I replace all the plastic and all the O-rings at the same time, so that way they kind of all mesh together. Or if you notice that you're building your shocks and they start to get a lot of rebound after a qualifier or something, it's probably time to redo them.
Yeah, and by plastics, you mean like the shock guides, right?
Yes.
The little white doodads that go in with your seals.
The little, the Delrin spacers. Let's see. I build all my shocks. There's a question on here that says, do you guys run your shocks dead or with some rebound? I always try and get my shocks as dead as possible. With the bladders, it's a little bit harder to get them, but even then I'll run my shocks in a qualifier and I'll come back and bleed them again, and then the next qualifier in the main, they'll be good.
Yeah, and I've done that before too. It is really important to get them how you need them, and get them. One of the biggest things is to get them equal, right and left, to get them equal.
Exactly.
We want them as dead as possible, but if you can get them equal, that's half the way, half the battle. The other thing too, why don't you talk about when is the best time to put oil in your shocks, traveling with shocks, stuff like that.
So I normally don't like to store my cars with the shocks on them, just because it's just putting force on the plastics and stuff that doesn't need to be. So whenever I store my cars, I always take the shocks off, so that way everything's kind of just in a neutral position and doesn't have any tension on it. And when I fly, I always end up, when I get to the track, I'll build all my shocks there, because I feel like on the plane or whatever, it might mess with them a little bit. I've never really checked that. I've just heard people say it, so I just rather be safe than sorry. And normally when you get there, you kind of feel the temperature, and I always end up running the same piston. I really like the 8-hole piston, so that's something that I pretty much try and run everywhere, and then just adjust oil and springs to fit that.
Yeah, guys, just so you know, it's that guy sitting there. He's the reason we have 812 tapered pistons now, and thankfully so. These guys do a lot of work. Anthony does a lot of work. Anthony does a lot of testing for me, everyone. So a lot of the times when stuff gets stronger, it's because of that guy sitting in front of you. I give major props to him.
I'm good at breaking stuff.
Well, you're fast and you hit stuff fast. So yeah, you're very talented at that. But he also, Anthony's very good at setup stuff. And he's one of the guys that helped us along the way with some of the 8-hole 1-2 testing, and definitely helped with that. So for what it's worth. Thank you, sir. People should know.
No problem.
That's why we have a big team, guys. I have a lot of guys that help me out. I couldn't get everything done. You'd have a new car every 10 years if it was just me doing it all by myself. So good group of engineers, a group of product specialists, a lot of different guys. Frank and I share ideas back and forth all the time. Junior now is a great asset and resource for us. All of that. So
Bob Taylor said that he thought he was a crash test dummy, but that's what it is, Bob. It's a team of crash test dummies.
What a SoCal boys are, right?
Yeah. Shane Foot said I like new cars every 10 years.
There you go. So, I mean, for what it's worth, to Anthony's point and talking about building your cars, to those of us that are in, say, SoCal, we travel up and down hills a lot here. Not huge hills usually, not mountains usually, but we do go from sea level to 2,000 feet over sea level, 3,000 feet over sea level pretty regularly traveling to races. It's a good time to rebuild your shocks, or at least bleed them. if you're running emulsion shocks when you get to the track. Now, it's much more important to bleed an emulsion shock with pressure changes. So when you're changing altitude, when the temperatures change 10 or 15 degrees, bleed your shock. It's going to be more consistent. But just so you guys can know, while we've been sitting here, I've now built the 4 shocks. That's what it normally takes. So let me move on to the next stage here. So the next bit, these big O-rings go into here. Otherwise, as you can see, they just spin right off. So you just kind of stick them in there. If you're going to grease them, I usually recommend greasing them before you put them in, if you're using grease. That way you're not getting a bunch of grease on the threads and then it just makes your shock body look kind of goofy. It just gets all black and then you got to clean it off a bunch. So I use the shock oil. Now here's what I do. I put a decent drop in there and then I just take my finger and I run it around probably 5 or 6 times to make sure. And then once it feels consistent, it's like, oh, okay, I'll wipe the top of it off. So on my rag, I just take it and put it down and just wipe the top of it off so there's not a bunch of oil on the top anymore. And then here's how I do this. It goes on the shock, right? I kind of push it up there and I actually go backwards. And you've heard it, it actually clicked in place and you can see that it's flat now. And now I can go forward or up, right? Very easily. And I just take this, just like I do the rest, and go most of the way to the top. Okay. So then the reason I don't go all the way to the top is I've gotten it too tight before where I couldn't really get it off well. So then I just pull it up to the top, wipe it off, and you can see it's all the way up to the top. It's got the O-ring on there. Now it's nice and easy to adjust. And then I'll do this 4 times. Yay. This is probably right here, putting shock collars on. For some reason, it's one of those things I look at, and as far as I'm concerned, it is the worst thing to do. I don't know why. It's not hard. But you'll see, I don't have the caps in here yet. And there's a reason for that, guys. And so we'll get to that next. So I just did the 2 front shocks. I'll put the collars on the rear shocks later, but let me show you the rest of building the front shocks here so you guys can see them. Okay. Now that these are at the top, you can see, obviously, there's a screw in them. These screws, I like to always run to the inside. And the reason I run them that way is because if you run them to the outside and you crash on a muddy track, you can get dirt into those screw heads, and then I got to dig it out, and it's just easier to build them this way. So I do this. So what I do is I take this and I point it inside one way, and I put the cap in, right, from this side, and the cap goes in. It's shaped like a D. The flat part goes down, okay? And then the other side I take, and now I've got the 2 screw heads together. So this one goes to the inside, so that's facing me. So now I take that, and I put, or I try to, there it goes, and put that in. So now, let me show your version. You can see I've got both of them in, and both of them are facing forward. Those are the front shocks. Now, the side that goes forward, I'm going to take my silver Sharpie and write in the middle of the L. All right, Jim, I'm coloring your shock collars. You can Dremel them later. But the reason I use this, guys, a Sharpie for other people's cars when I'm building it, is because unless I talk to them about like dremeling their car first, I don't want to. So now you can see, right, I've made a visible left and a visible right shock. My line is forward. My bleeder screws are both facing in. good to go. Now, I put the springs on, screws this way. This screw goes this way, okay? And the shock, this part's facing outside or facing me. In this case, I'm facing it towards you. Now I want to find the cup that the screw head faces me too, just because it looks prettier to me. So on the front of my car, this will be here, this will be leaning in, and this you always want out so that this isn't hitting the inside of the arm when the arm's fully drooped out. So if I put this cup on here, you can see the screw face wouldn't be hanging out. So let's try this cup. Okay, now this cup, there we go. There's the nice big push through fat shiny screw face part. So I picked that up. You get 2 left cups and 2 right cups in your kit. Now this screw from the front slides right into it, right? You can see it slides most of the way into it. And I put the screw in. Again, the screw doesn't have to be tight. You can see it's not even crimping closed. It's literally just to hold this cup in place, guys. So now, as you can see the shock, it will be leaning this way, right? I've got this to the inside, that's forward, my line's there, and this is facing out. And so now on the other one, I will now do the opposite. And I like the spring color up to the top, but that's just my personal preference. So, but let me try to show it to you so you can see it better. So on the cup, see that side there? It's a really, really small hole and it's not shiny. Whoops. It's like dull, like the rest of the plastic. If I turn it around, the hole's a lot bigger and it's a shiny surface. That's because there's a pin that goes into there when they make the mold. And then now I can just push the screw most of the way in. I do like the way they made the 22X4 ones of these. We learned after we made these, so the 22X4 got a special screw that you can put in either direction. And then the last thing with a shock that you have to do is put this little ball in. Now, this is just kind of me being picky, I guess, but if you look at a shock end, let me see if I can get it so you guys can see it, okay? So that side looks normal, like the plastic and everything looks flat and normal there, okay? This other side, see that ring, shiny ring? That's the side that they pulled this off the ball in the mold, which means that side is already a tiny bit more open than that side. So why would I want to make that side any looser? So I always make sure I put the ball into the side that has that, which is the side that they released it off the mold with. I know. Poor Anthony. Sorry, sir.
Oh, man. I never would have noticed that, ever.
You guys can do whatever you want, but now I've got a ball that's nice and free in there. Sometimes when you stick it in the other side, it expands it or it does weird things, pushes plastic in. I don't know. Just one of those things. So something you learned today about plastics and molds.
Yeah.
Anyway.
We had a question about how you actually make the shock even. Yes, this is a 10 scale shock, but it's the only shock that I have sitting here with a end on it. So when you have a front shock and another front shock, you're measuring from the bottom of this to here and using a mic to make sure that both of your shocks match. That will say
mic,
both
a mic
shocks.
or calipers, as other people know them as.
Yes.
So just
Caliper, yeah.
digital. No, it's okay. They're mic. You were right. I'm just making sure people know them as different things in different countries. So that's why we say both.
No, for sure.
But you're using this, and
But that's all you're doing is measuring this.
It's hard to show it on here because we got the shock boot on here. But what he's saying is, I turn this on and I measure from there to there. Right?
And that'll ensure that your shocks are the right length. Or I think Wilson makes a tool too for 10 scale that actually
Yeah, they did at one point. You push on it and you could see if the two were the same.
Yeah.
So
I have
anyway,
one somewhere.
I probably have one in my garage somewhere too, but it's been a while.
Yeah. It's in a box.
Yeah, exactly. So let me. Holy crow! It's been an hour and 15 minutes. So guys, I'm going to go ahead and build the turnbuckles now. Actually, no. You know what? Really quick. Here's another shock. Okay. Let's try not to mix everything up. Another random shock that I built earlier. There's no oil in it because it was going to get shipped to somebody, so I didn't put any oil in it. So I told you guys I would build a bladder shock really quick, but it is going to be pretty quick. I can do another shock building video for you guys later on, but this is really meant to be the 8XE, and not that everybody wants to watch me probably build turnbuckles, so they'd probably rather see me build a bladder shock anyway. I don't even know what this is. I'm going to empty it later anyway, so I'm just going to use some random oil so I don't waste my good oil. Okay, so building a bladder shock, you can see this has a bladder in it already. Okay, some things to know about bladders. The other side of it, the back side of it, you want no dirt, no debris, no oil, no wetness, no nothing. Whenever you rebuild a bladder shock, you should be pulling this out and cleaning the back of it to make sure there's nothing that's made its way back there. Also,
not with carb cleaner.
Yeah, carb cleaner, motor spray, nitro cleaner, any of that. If something's behind there, there's a good chance that there's a tear in your bladder. You don't want that. So anyway, when you build a bladder shock, this one I know is clean on the other side because it's a brand new shock. I just put it together today. There's only a little bit of oil there because I dropped some oil in case the shocks moved around while it was on the car because I didn't want them dry. You'll notice the screw's already in place. So you want to essentially have the air volume inside there. So instead of a emulsion shock where the air is in here mixed with the oil, you're separating the air volume in a bleeder shock, right? So bleeder shock, I start the same way. I fill it up, I don't know, about halfway. Get the hair out of here from my wonderful cats. I go up slowly through the oil. Okay, now you guys can't really see that, but it's through the oil. And then I let it drop back down into it. Again, on this one, it's more important that I go slow and smooth to try to not create any bubbles, okay? Tapping on it. Now this is in the oil, just kind of massaging it some. That helps to get the bubbles up to the top. Now I do this probably a little different than most. Some fill it up like an emulsion, start to run the cap on there, and then bonsai a bunch of oil out. I was raised on a super budget, and so that much oil, it seems stupid, but sometimes it could fill another shock. Sometimes it couldn't. So here's how I do it. I fill this up, and again, you start to build an understanding of where the oil can be versus you building the shock over time, knowing how much comes out. But if this is a brand new shock and I don't really know what's going on, okay, I've got oil in here. You can kind of see it there. Let me turn this down. Okay, you can see the oil there, but I'm getting up to the point where if I push this down all the way, I want a little bit more because I don't want it. But this particular shock, there's a lot of what we call head space. That piston's all the way up right now, and I've probably still got 7 millimeters, 6 millimeters of space, okay? Sometimes the piston comes all the way up to the top. That's a really hard to bleach scenario, but most of them aren't like that anymore. So I've come up, I've got this all the way in right now, right? I am going to make this go so that the dome of the viscosity is to the top of this, okay? And I'm gonna do that because I know that that dome is more deeply dished than this viscosity dome is gonna be. So I now have enough oil in there that when I go to bleed this out, I can bleed out all the air. Okay, now this is a much more messy process if you do it right. In this case, you're looking for the oil to come out of this little tiny hole. What that means is that if you got dirt in that hole, you need to clean it out, guys, before you do this. Now, normally I would set this shock on the stand and probably let it sit for 5 or 10 minutes until I see all the air bubbles are gone. But for sake of the video, I'm gonna go ahead and build it now. So what I do is I get this started. Okay, now it's started. I'm holding this in the whole time because I'm gonna try to build a dead shock. That's how I want the shock. If I want the shock halfway, I bring it out halfway. If I want it all the way, I pull it out all the way. In this case, I want every bladder shock I've ever built, I want dead. So I'm not in the center, I'm sorry. Okay, so here we are.
So like when I'm at that point, Ryan, I take my bladder and I actually pull it over the
you take your boot
shock boot that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just pull the boot over top of this. That way all the shocks are built at the same
Yeah, he's saying he does this. Okay, and I don't mind. That's not a bad idea, guys. I don't have anything against it. And there you go. Right? So I'm going to run that back up, except that now there's air stuck. So I'm going to run that back up. The cap back on. Okay, now I'm holding this up, guys. My hand is holding it up on the bottom here. You can not see because I can't bend that way. There you go. Okay, I'm holding it up. I'm holding the shock cap in place and I'm spinning the shock body. Okay, see the silver line go around like that? That's because the shock body is going around. Oil's going out of that little hole. Okay, hopefully you guys can see it dripping. It's clear oil. I probably should have used colored oil. Now it's to the point where I'm kind of tapped out on the seal. Okay, I run it back and in, and back and in, and back and in, and then it's pretty sealed there. Okay, I take this, put that on, run this back in. Now I'm holding everything. Okay, I'm going to show you this. Now I tighten this all the way. Okay, now I'm going to wipe off all this oil. Initially with a paper towel and then with a cloth, because a cloth always gets it off a lot better, guys. That's why you always see all of us with these microfiber towels. Now, the way I just did that, because it's a new shock especially, okay, you run this in and out a couple times. You're going to see it's going to come out some. Now, that's referred to as rebound. Okay, now the thing is, I tightened this cap probably a good half turn after it was already sealed, right? So I technically have too much oil in there. So I'm gonna re-bleed this one more time. However, I do know I'm probably never going to get it perfectly where it's going to stay here, because if I do, there's actually going to be air in here because this is a brand new shock and it just drops under its own accord right now anyway. So I'm now going to put this back in here. And again, the seals break in so that you can get them closer and closer to tight without having to use any type of a wrench. But I'm going to bring this back up slowly so I'm not spitting oil everywhere. And I think I built too much stuff today. There it goes. Okay, and now it's down still, guys, so that hole's down. And I'm going to try to get some more oil worked out of there. Okay. Right, you can see, maybe, No, the drip's gone now. See how more oil came out? And I'm going to tighten this again. Now you guys can see by me tightening it, I had built this way earlier and now my L is still lined up with that line because that's where I had it previously. Okay, so that's the purpose of always retightening these things. But let me pull this back down. Okay, and you run it in and out a couple times. Now you can see, it comes out a little bit, right? This is a brand new shock. For me, feeling the shock, like the biggest thing you're looking for when you're trying to build a bladder shock is that when you pull it up, you're kind of dealing with the same amount of pressure on your finger, right? If it gets to the, say here, and you're like, and you can barely or not push it in, you need to spend a lot more time rebleeding it.
You can also bleed it too much to where you have that air pocket at the top, and then your chocks are going to be very inconsistent. After 5 or 10 minutes, they're going to get super springy. So
yeah, because then you're dealing with a bladder emulsion shock is what you just made, which is what you really never want to have, because now you have air above it and you have air in the oil. And you definitely.
The only thing that I really, sorry.
Go ahead.
The only thing that I really do different than you and when I bleed shocks is that I have the hole, I actually have it at the top.
Okay.
That's on the, just because I feel like the liquid should stay at the bottom and the air should be at the top. So when I actually close it, I hold the cap and I spin the top, and then the air will escape a little bit easier, I feel like, and it'll make more of a dead shock with the hole in the top, because then the air has an easier way out. But I pretty much do the same thing you do for all that then.
Well, yeah, maybe guys try it both ways and see which way produces a more dead shock for you guys. I'd love to hear the feedback. You know me, Anthony. That means I'll be trying that at the track whenever I get to be on a track again, which hopefully sometime soon. Anyway, I'm going to set that shock to the side. I
actually bought a shock pump too.
Oh, factory. Oh, wait.
Oh, they're pretty fancy. But I saw Mayo had one that is actually, it plugs into his charger. It's a, I don't remember what brand it was, but it plugs in. It's electric. Yeah.
All right, and we are going to build. We have, okay, guys, we're going to try to do this in under like 10 minutes. So really, I'm just going to kind of talk to you more about these guys. Okay, so here's your bags. C1, C2, C3. Just like the diffs, don't open all the bags and then have to figure out what goes with what. This bag is everything you need for your steering turnbuckles, all in one little bag. Open this bag, build this bag. This is everything you need for your rear turnbuckles. If you open this bag and this bag, maybe you mix up this turnbuckle, this end, and this end. Who knows what you do? Maybe you keep it all separate, and that's fine. But my recommendation is you open this bag, you build this bag. You open this bag, you build this bag, you open this bag, you build this bag, and then you won't have any confusion. You didn't mix up any parts, and you know you're good to go. The one thing I want to talk about really quick is we learned some stuff after the 8X Elite was made. And we have some updated rod ends for the camber links. These rod ends, they work good. They're really strong. As far as these go, it's actually these ones and these ones, the ones for the camber, not for the steering. But we found that in certain situations, they can get kind of sticky under load. So we came out with, let me show them to you side by side, some new ones. You can see they're different colors. This is the original. This is the new one. It's gray. Okay, pretty easy to tell the difference. These are a different material, and they're just a lot smoother. And that's this part, TLR 244068. They're on their way here right now. We actually shipped them air, so end of next week maybe we might have them in stock, but you can order this part number already if you guys are interested. But as far as building turnbuckles, let me go over all the important stuff. So let me build this set of turnbuckles. I'm going to build them with the new rod ends. So here's some things about turnbuckles. Our turnbuckles have a little notch on one end or line. That line is the standard screw size. So it's a right hand thread. So righty tighty, lefty loosey. The other side is reverse thread or left hand thread. That's what makes it so that when a turnbuckle spins, they both go in or both go out. And then we have different balls. One has a flange on it, one doesn't. The biggest thing you want to do when you're building these is you build them all really quick, right? These are the rear ones, so they get the longer turnbuckle and the longer rod ends. And so what I will do is I literally take them, stick them on a wrench. Now, I've greased turnbuckles. Whenever it's a ball cup, so for like a 22 or whatnot, I will grease inside here. When it's a captured one, and especially with these newer ones, I don't really feel I need the grease. I'll just stick it on here. See, and you can see, watch, I could sit here and get going. And I'm going to probably pitch a fit, and then I'm going to get fired because something's going to happen on here. So back to what Anthony mentioned earlier, here's a reamer. I'm literally going to take this. It's like 2 turns till I see a tiny bit of plastic coming out. And I'm just going to quickly ream. And the only reason this is there is to make the pitch a little bit more gradual to start all of your rod ends easier. Now these go in plenty far, so you never have to worry about them stripping or pulling out or anything like that. Okay, so now I did that. So now watch. Now I stick it back on there. Right. And all of a sudden, that's good to go, right? I turned it, got a full rotation. Now I'm just going to take my little TLR turnbuckle wrench, and I'm literally just going to turn this most of the way in. Now the book has a measurement, and it's good to follow that measurement, but with the camber lengths, it doesn't really matter so much. Now with the steering turnbuckles, it doesn't really matter how you build them, but the steering turnbuckles, you always want to measure them inside to inside to make sure that they're the same length. No matter what, your steering turnbuckles are always the same length. That's what makes it turn to the right and turn to the left the same. So now I put that on there, and I go backwards like this, right? And there we go. But you could see how much easier it was to start it now that, and then this one goes backwards, right? So the other thing you do is you always thread these in till they're the same distance from the center nut, or approximately. Okay, and there you go. There's most of a rear turnbuckle built. Now I'm going to build this other one real quick. Anthony, I know you have something that you do with turnbuckles. How do you get them started?
I actually put an old turnbuckle on a drill, and then I just put a little bit of grease on that turnbuckle, and then I do half all the ones that go on the right for all the right-handed threads. I do all those, but that same the old turnbuckle on the drill, and then I flip the turnbuckle around, and then I do all the other side.
Okay.
And that just makes it so it's a little bit easier to turn all the turnbuckles once they finally settle down on the car and they sit there for a minute.
Yeah, because the plastic will essentially shrink back into place. So, all right. So here's the last bit I want to talk about turnbuckles. So turnbuckles, here I've got 2 turnbuckles, right? They're both oriented the same way. Okay. The little notch is on the same side here. Now, there's 2 ways you can do this. You can put the notch on the same side and make sure you put different balls on one side than the other. Or what I usually like to do is I will take them and put one notch one way and one notch the other way, right? So now I've got the notch up here on this side and the notch down here on this side. And then I will snap the ball, same ball on this side. Now, same thing, okay? Whoop. See how that side's nice and gray? And that side's got that nice shiny part. Again, that's the part that the pin pushed it off the ball when it was molded. So I will always put the ball in through that side that's shiny. And I'm just using just some pliers, okay, twist. And again, since I have them opposite way, I'm going to put the same ball in this side. And you guys can see how nice and free those balls are in there. Okay, and then this side gets flanged balls. Yes, Jim, I'm giving you new rod ends, right? So now when I build the car, okay, and I put them on the same side so that I can adjust it, I now have, well, they actually go the other way, right? These go to the, there you go. Okay. Nope, I don't like them that way either. All right, that's how I like them. So you've got the flange ball on the inside, right? With both of these lines facing the same direction. You will notice that in every TLR manual you see, these lines, or the right-hand side line, is always on the United States driver's side. And that's because that's where Todd likes it. So that's where we all put them. And so it keeps it nice and consistent, and it makes it so that any turnbuckle I go to on any TLR car, forward is tighter and backward is looser if I'm facing the car away from you guys. So that's kind of my tip on those. But you could see turnbuckles, especially when they're closed-end turnbuckles, so easy to build. Like with the 22 and the 22X4, we do have this tool. Wrong way. And this end actually holds the ball cup. So you can kind of get here and hold the ball cup and thread it in. So just in case you're building the 22 rod ends. But that's really about it. I'm going to build the other ones here. But if there's any other questions here, why don't you see, are there any other questions here, Anthony? And can you scroll or not?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, so scroll through there. Let's see if there's any questions. If you guys have any last minute questions, let us know. Otherwise, we got to jump off in the next 5 or 10 minutes here because they're doing another live guys tonight. If you're interested in asking the Spectrum folks any questions, Nick Mulatto, Thomas, Dakota, I think Scott will all be on there. So be sure to hit that one up as well, guys.
Yeah, there's not really any other questions. Anthony Howarth wants to know if I'm just a supervisor. No, I was letting Ryan build some shocks and some turnbuckles. There's really only one guy that can teach that class. So
yeah, fun.
Aluminum tools. Mike Marshall wants to know if there's going to be aluminum shock tools for the 8 car, like the 10th car.
Let's see. They're on the list, and I've been asking for those for 4 years now. We're working. I have a different angle I'm working on those right now. So you'll probably see some 8 scale shock tools coming in 2 or 3 months. Probably about a month and a half after you see our droop blocks for the 8 scale.
Carlos asked, what kind of conditions do you advise to use? My answer for that is probably, I like to use it on more of a emulsion on more of a high bite, like a smoother track, which is probably backwards for most people. I pretty much use bladder everywhere I go, though. I like the way it feels a little bit better. But I know Dakota likes to run a lot of emulsion. And I think he runs bladder normally on harder pack stuff. So
yeah, Dakota does tend. So we did a lot of shock testing when he was out here the last time around, guys. And Dakota actually was on bladder most of the time in his buggy and his truggy. For the main of buggy, he did switch to emulsion because an emulsion shock will usually feel a little bit lighter, and it makes it so you feel like you have more grip going through the bumps. So it's different. When the bumps get really, really, really big, emulsion can help sometimes with you feeling like you have more grip. When the bumps are kind of medium to small, a bladder shock will actually make you feel like you have more grip because your tires are being pushed back down in the ground. So just depends how big things are, what you're feeling at the time, all that fun jazz. Anything else?
I think that's about it, Ryan.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you, everybody that's still watching. I know building turnbuckles nobody really cares about, so a lot of people dropped off, but really just thank you, Anthony. I really appreciate your time tonight, sir. And hopefully we can get to the track soon. Or find one or build one or something. I need to do something. I'm dying.
Like right before all this started, I put a brand new layout in it, Palm Desert, and I haven't even got to run on it yet. So yeah, hopefully
it's just sitting there drying away, right?
Yeah. But the track will be solid, so it's gotten rained down a couple times.
That's true, huh? Yeah, it will.
Yeah, so it should hold up pretty good.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for watching. This will be posted on Facebook. Please share it. This will also be posted on YouTube. So when all of these steps are finished, we'll create a YouTube playlist so that you can just go in, and if you're building a car, you can kind of build along. So anyway, if you guys have any questions, you know where to find me. Feel free to hit me up anytime. And we appreciate it. Good night, everyone.